Karl, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure.
Now, so let's start off with a summary of how your long career and how you got into it.
I graduated with a diploma in communications and what was called communications engineering. It was electronics radio from RMIT. And I was trying to get into research. I had a post office cadetship, which paid me a real salary, the actual salary of a clerk, while I did my last 2 years. By the way, I say to people, if there was a real shortage, I'm a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'm saying, that was an indication of what people do when there was a real shortage.
Right.
So I got a proper salary. It was the same as if I'd been employed by the post office as a junior clerk.
Right.
However, even though I got very good grades, I couldn't break into the research labs in a meaningful way. They did try to put me there, but that would be a long story. I won't go into it. But anyway, so I left and I went to work for a company called Elliott Automation.
Right.
Elliott Automation was one of the British pioneers of the computer industry in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And I joined them in the end of 1964 at their RMIT site.
Right.
As what was quaintly called in those days a customer engineer, and that was maintaining the hardware. I wasn't... I did okay, but I wasn't quite as successful as that as I would have liked, and they asked me to leave.
Right.
I've actually been sacked once. I got a job working for ICI ANZ,
Right.
which in those days was one of the biggest engineering groups in Australia.
Yeah.
In their head office up on the corner of the Lonsdale Street and
Right.
and Nicholson Parade.
Okay.
It was Melbourne's first skyscraper.
Yeah.
And I spent a little bit of time at their labs in Ascot Vale,
Right.
learning to program Sirius. There will be some people who will remember Sirius. Then I went to Central Engineering Laboratory and wrote programs in a language called K Autocode, which was a language that had been developed by ICI in the UK.
Right.
We ran these jobs. They were sent by courier to the Bassett Engineering Laboratory at the University of Sydney that had a KDF9. Then they got a 360/40, so I wrote Fortran and PL1 for that. And then after being there for 2 years, they were suggesting that since I was an engineer, I might want to rotate through their engineering training program, which meant my next stop was one of the chemical engineering plants out in Fisherman's Bend or somewhere.
Right.
I wasn't really very keen on that, and because I thought it was pretty good at what I was doing. And then I went to Monash University as a programmer in the computer centre there, run by Cliff Bellamy. Cliff was one of the early fellows of ACS.
Okay. Yeah.
And there I got involved in hardware or assembly level hardware operating system issues associated with what was then a mainframe. And when, at the risk of being a grumpy old man, sometimes when people suggest to me I need to get with it and I shouldn't be worrying about how difficult some things are, I just say to them I stopped writing Absolute Assembler in 1965.
Right.
But that was one of the most important parts of my career in terms of what I learned and the exposure, the people I had exposure to, and that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And then I went to work for LM Ericsson. Ericsson advertised for some people who were computer programmers who had telecommunications backgrounds.
Yeah.
And in my studies at RMIT, I had studied telephony plus other stuff that was related. And so they hired me and sent me to Stockholm with my family.
Right.
Wife and one child and another one arriving. And again, that was an unbelievable experience. I went there, given that they were building computer-controlled telephone exchanges, I thought it would be either, and since I'd been doing stuff with computer hardware, I thought either I'd be teaching them or they're the big, most effective people in the world, and they'll be teaching me.
Yep.
And it was weird. There was no question when it came to building real-time telephone systems and that sort of high reliability stuff. They were either ahead of the pack or up with the pack. The computers, by the way, were fully duplicated. So these were ultra high reliability stuff.
Yeah.
But when it came to their programming support systems, they were hopeless. They had very little experience with anything like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I sort of found myself in this interesting space where there were things that I could help them with, and then there was this huge and wonderful learning curve, and it was wonderful too, about real-time telephone exchanges. And by the way, Ericsson's, people who are in the operating system area would know about the concept of semaphores, which was attributed to Dijkstra, and in publications either in 67 or 68. When I arrived in Sweden in 1969, that concept was embedded in their operating system design and implementation, and they were looking at how to do it in hardware. And based on my experience with things like that, to get to that point, they must have come up with this before Dijkstra. They would have had to come up with it years ago,
Right.
because these ideas often take a while to get into a complete system.
Yeah.
So I worked on that, and I did some job control language programming, and I did some other stuff for them, and then I moved to Melbourne. And I think about this a lot, is that I moved to Sydney. I went back to Sydney with the implementation team. We were building, so this is another thing which is different today, is that the telecommunications providers were part of something called CCITT.
Right.
And I can't remember what
The acronym.
what the acronym is. It's a French acronym.
Mm.
And basically, when there were new proposals for signalling systems or switching systems, these companies that were members of CCITT would approve a standard.
Yeah.
That's point one. Point two is they would then be responsible for letting contracts to manufacturers to prove the standard.
Right.
Now, you can think about how different that is today. So Ericsson's had a contract with OTC, which was the Overseas Telecommunications Agency. And they were building a field trial exchange, and we worked on that in Sweden. We worked on the software for that. I made several suggestions to the hardware design, and to my great pleasure, one of the more complicated ideas I put forward got adopted in the next generation. Anyway, one of the things that we had to do was to find a service to run our big Fortran software for producing tests and stuff like this. And I did the negotiations for that. I would have been every bit of 29.
Right.
And so I negotiate negotiated 3 deals, and as has been true for me since I got 3 deals that were pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't decide what to do.
Okay. Yeah.
So I went and I asked my mentor, and he was very impressed. But then he gave me some advice. And the advice was, he says, never put the people you're fighting with into a situation where they're in an irrecoverable position unless you're going to kill them.
Right.
He said, these deals you've got, what your risk is that they are so good that you'll sign a contract and the supplier won't be able to meet it.
Yeah.
And that was exactly what happened. We had to concede some stuff to keep the contract. But the bit that was fascinating was that the bureau we were using in Melbourne, we're operating in Rose Bay in Sydney,
right,
and we had to get stuff to Rose Bay, have it processed overnight, and get it back on people's desks by 10 o'clock the next morning.
Right. Okay.
This is in 1972.
Yeah.
And I did a design of a process to do that, and we did dry runs of it. And the first live run, which worked, the first dry run failed.
Right.
The reason why it failed was that in the dry runs, we had somebody in the computer room who had been, no mobile phones, been told by telephone when the stuff was going to arrive outside a particular door in the building in a taxi. So somebody came down and was waiting for it. In the live runs, nobody came down. Taxi driver had no way of contacting the computer room, and if he did, he wouldn't have done it.
Yeah,
I mean, taxi driver's not going to sit around while his controller contacts somebody.
Yeah.
So we had to, that was one of the things I learned was that processes that we design for humans to follow with the best will in the world and with the greatest care in the world, you can miss something screamingly obvious. And the screamingly obvious thing is a computer operator in a big computer centre going to drop what they're doing and go downstairs and open the door to be there at a particular time. And the short answer was, not unless we have specifically scheduled this step in the process and we're paying for it.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was a big lesson, was that, and I think that lesson had come through working at Monash too, that there were processes and there were things that people were asked to do and written down processes, and invariably they don't completely work, so people don't follow them.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why system upgrades run into trouble.
Sure.
But let me just come back to that point at Monash. As for example, that was one of my big lessons about customer service. We had card punchers.
Right.
And card punchers, we had battery, about 20 of these bloody things.
Sure.
And they were causing terrific trouble because they were unreliable.
Yeah.
So somebody would come to use a card punch and it wouldn't work, and then they'd have to find a member of staff, of the computer centre staff, who they would probably end up in an altercation with.
Right.
Because they would be angry, the staff member would not like them being angry, and so the next thing I know, my boss is getting a phone call from the newly appointed professor of physics saying that his star recruit is having trouble. Anyway, Cliff Bellamy, what Cliff did was really clever. He said everybody will arrive by roster, there'll be a roster, you'll all arrive early and you'll all test every card punch in the first thing in the morning before anyone gets there.
Right.
And if one's not working, you'll put a card on it, say, out of order.
Yeah.
And then you will log it and get...
Yeah.
The complaints disappeared in a week.
Right.
And it was an interesting thing because the step was so simple. It required a really smart guy to think of it.
Yeah.
But the thing was, it was predicated on the assumption that these things are going to fail anyway.
Yeah.
So why not do this and why not put customer service first? And Cliff was really, really good
Yeah.
at that. He was a smart techo too, but he understood that. So anyway, I went to Sweden, spent 2 years in Sweden. I learnt to speak passable Swedish. Some of my compatriots ended up at the vernacular level of Swedish Australians. I worked on what was called the AKE 13, AXE 13 system. Made some design contributions to the APZ 150 system, suggested a number of solutions to their problems, and while I wasn't doing research, I was getting there.
Yeah.
And building a little bit of a reputation. So anyway, after the stint in Sydney, I got bored with being an operations manager again, which is essentially what I was.
Yeah.
And I responded to an ad from Control Data Corp. Digital Equipment.
Right.
And DEC offered me a job as a technical support person, and I went to my boss, and he said, "Well, you better call, the director, who's our senior manager in Melbourne, called Siggy Cronstedt in Melbourne." And within about 3 hours, I had a phone call back saying, we'll match their offer, we'll add this much to the offer, we'll put you in the research labs, which is where you've always wanted to be, move your family back to Melbourne.
Okay, right.
So I spent about 3 years in the research labs in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And I worked on software support for the what we believed at the time was the world's first telephone queue.
Oh, okay. Right.
We believed it. And I haven't been able to find an example of another project that predates it.
Right.
The nearest I got, I think, was ROLM, ROLM, which is American military, and it wasn't actually a telephone queue, not like it is today. Anyway, but the thing that happened with that was that this is where, different times in your life you have serious professional challenges. Someone had convinced the director of the lab that, this is 1974, convinced the director of the lab that they should implement the software for this queue that was going to be on a very locally designed 16-bit computer. And they were going to use a programming language called Algol 68.
Right.
Now, the risk situation looked like this. The guy, in 1974, there was only one Algol 68 compiler anywhere in the world.
Okay. Yeah.
Written by, I think it was written by the people at the Melbourne Royal Radar, established in the UK, who were the top compiler writers outside the manufacturers.
Right.
It didn't work properly. It had a series of restrictions, none of which the Ericsson people were assuming. They'd been assuming they're going to implement the full language.
Right.
So that was point one. Point two was there were papers flowing around saying that the language was unimplementable by really reputable people. Point two. Point three was that the people who were going to do this had never written any sort of programming language processor of any kind.
Right.
Ever. They were really bright, but they'd never done it.
Yeah.
So that was three risk factors. The fourth risk factor was that they were planning to use a programming language called Snowball, which was an interpretive AI-based for this language, pattern matching language, which was hideously slow.
Right.
So I looked at this and I went to my boss and I told a deliberate lie. I said something like, Brian, have you thought about what happens if this team doesn't succeed? And Brian said, not really. And I said, well, I think the risk's very high, actually. And I explained to him what the risk was.
Yeah.
And I said, if I can pick my people, my 3 people, I can produce an assembler, not a high-level language. I didn't have the expertise to do the high-level language bit, but I could do an assembler for you, and I can do it in 6 weeks.
Right.
So it was a lie. And Brian sort of called me back in a couple of hours later and said, pick your people, and I picked the people, and he said, no, not that one. We put a young woman on the team, so we want this young woman to get experience. So the bottom line was that we did build the assembler. We it didn't take 6 weeks. It took about 3 months.
Yeah.
We did something that had never been done in Ericsson's before. We set a performance mark for it.
Yeah.
We said it will perform at a certain rate. We also built, the interpreter was going to be built anyway, and we delivered that.
Okay.
And there was a stage at which, while it was being tested, somebody went to the boss and said, this is working so well, we want to use it in real life.
Yeah.
And it came back to me, and I said, if you insist on doing that, I will put a banner in it that says that the EPAS design implementation team has not authorised the use of this.
Right.
So they gave us another couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And so all the software was written in that, and there was and the Algol 68 team. That project, we delivered our team and stuff and moved on to other stuff. The Algol 68 stuff. And I'm going to use some numbers. Our assembler ran on a a DEC 10, KA10, which was the slow machine that had floating point. It was a slowish machine. It ran at 10 lines of code per CPU second.
Yeah.
When these guys claimed they were able to demonstrate it, several years later, they boasted that it was taking 30 seconds per CPU line.
Right.
Now, I won't go into all the numbers, but anybody who follows those sorts of numbers would know that this was catastrophic. The loss on that was so great, on that 68 project was so great. A lot of us believe that was the reason why Ericsson's closed their labs at that stage in Glenroy.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
They lost about $1 million on it.
Yeah.
In 1970s money.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, substantial.
Substantial. So from there I went to become a tutor at Monash University, which was a fairly uneventful period.
Yeah.
In the early days, in my first stint at Monash, and in those days I became committed to program reuse and modularity and stuff like that. I had one of those experiences that I'd written a very large Fortran program, about 3,000 lines, and it was very, very, very difficult to debug.
Yeah.
And Peter Howell, who was one of the only professionally trained people in the 60s around, done an honours degree at Wolverhampton in London.
Okay.
Peter said, break it up into small parts, and he said, then you'll be able to. So I did that.
Yeah.
But I came absolutely committed to that. I had some other experiences, which I won't go into, technical experiences with that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I spent a couple of years back in the computer centre doing a bit of programming and a bit of support, a little bit of teaching. And
Yeah.
the pay, I'd dropped a huge amount in salary. I'd taken a 40% drop in salary to go from Ericsson's to Monash as tutor. I'd gone from senior research engineer to tutor.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's just a little bit of an aside which is very, very interesting. In those days, we used to speculate about what was going wrong in the computer industry. One of the things that was believed to be going wrong is that people were getting really good at their programming and design, and then they were promoted into management.
Right.
Well, Ericsson didn't do that. Ericsson paid people according to their competence, not their position.
Right.
So when I left, my immediate manager called me in and pointed out that I was being paid more than he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, if some bastard had told me, I might not have left.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that this was really important, not just in Australia, but Ericsson's right throughout.
Yeah.
The recognition of the importance of technical excellence and being prepared to pay for it so people don't move
Yeah.
out of it. I have a friend working at Ericsson's at the moment, and she tells me that that still goes now.
Okay.
Not quite as strong as it used to be, but it still goes. And so that's one of our problems, is that we move. It's the Peter principle.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, promote people until they get to a level of incompetence.
That's right. Yeah.
So anyway, coming back to that. So I left Monash because it didn't pay very well, and I went to RMIT as a lecturer.
Yeah.
And I spent the next 10 years lecturing. I spent, I was one of the people who designed their first computer science degree.
Okay. Yeah.
In 1970, it started in 1979. I designed all the software engineering for it.
Yeah.
Because by then I decided I was a software engineer, or was interested in software engineering. I did a master's degree in computer architecture with Chris Wallace as my supervisor at Monash, and I was taking forever to finish it. And my wife took me to see a David Williamson play called The Perfectionist.
Right.
And it's a story about a guy doing a PhD, and he's Australian and he's in Denmark, and every time he gets to the point where he's nearly ready to submit, he finds something different, and he's got to
read it.
He's got to start all over again, and sort of so I was taken to see that as a sort of a hint,
right? Yeah.
To get finished. So I got that finished, and I stayed at RMIT until RMIT until end of '88.
Yeah.
And so that's probably a nice place to stop and wind back to ACS stuff.
I was just about to say that.
So in 1970, beginning of 1974, I was doing honours subjects at Monash University, database, or file designers, I think the subject was.
Yeah. And
the lecturer was Tony Montgomery. Tony Montgomery, I think at that stage, was chairman of the Victorian branch and a member of ACS Council.
Yeah.
And I was being very critical about ACS, and also being very, very critical about Australia and its lack of computer development.
Right. Yeah.
And Monty said, I'm getting sick of this. And he said, there are two vacancy committee spots at ACS National. So one is prizes, and the other is the software industry committee.
Right.
And I applied for both of them. I actually thought prizes might be quite interesting. And I got the software industry one.
Yeah.
And I got a letter from Ashley Goldsworthy.
Right.
And it was basically just about 3 paragraphs congratulating me, telling me I had a budget of about 2,500 Australian, which was actually quite a bit then.
Yeah.
And also set of terms of reference. And I looked at the set of terms of reference, and and oh dear, I don't know what I'm allowed to do. So I went and showed it to my wife, and my wife said, oh dear, I think you could just do just about anything.
Right. Yeah.
So I rang Ashley Goldsworthy, very timidly.
Yeah.
And I said to Ashley, I'm a bit concerned about the terms of reference. They seem to be terribly wide-ranging and would allow me to do almost anything. And Ashley said, I don't care what you do, as long as it's relevant to the terms of reference. And if you get it wrong, I'll sack you.
Yep. Right. Yeah.
And I thought, I can live with that.
Yeah.
So I went on from there. And I set up a committee. I had help from all sorts of people in identifying people. Alan Power, who was at Pacific Computer World Weekly at the time, helped me connect with people. I met people like John Marquette. I'll remember some more names and I'll get back to you. But
no, that's okay.
Roger Allen,
Yep.
Jack, I've forgotten his name, the guy who set up Computer Power. I met heaps of people and I set up a national committee.
Yeah.
And we made representations on a whole string of things to government. And we also, at the beginning of 1982, Ashley had returned as president of ACS and sent me an invitation from the trade mission in Kyoto to attend a Japanese software industry conference, and I looked at that and I thought, well, not going to do much if I go. It'll be fun, but it's not going to do much if I go there. I wonder what happens if I put together a trade mission.
Right. Yeah.
So I put together a trade mission, and I got help from Ian Dennis, who was then is now an ACS luminary, but Ian Dennis was the president of the Software Houses Association. So we had a trade mission of I think 6 or 7 people funding themselves. Some charging them enough to support the ACS's activities, a bit of contribution from ACS. We went to Singapore and we met with the National Computer Board of Singapore, which became one of the most influential bodies of its kind in the world. We met them when they were just setting up. And I can remember sitting down with Ian or someone and whoever it was saying, these people are really ambitious. I wonder if they know what they're doing and whether they can do it. And somebody else said, that's okay. He said, but our worry is maybe they do know what they're doing and they will do it. And they did. So that was fantastic. We went to Singapore, Japan, sorry. We went to Japan and attended the Japanese Software Industry Association conference, along with a number of other delegations. And there are 2 personal stories I'd like to tell. One of them, I was in a negotiating meeting, and they were Japanese were representing MITI, although they're not supposed to, but they were representing MITI.
The Ministry of Trade.
And they were putting pressure on people to agree to form a body called a socio, a regional association. And they were not getting. They weren't getting. How would you put it? People were pretty uncomfortable. They hadn't expected this, and when they turned to me, I didn't know. I had a bloody clue what I was going to say. And I was looking out the window and I could just see the outlines of Mount Fuji. And I said, "Isn't it interesting?" I said, "Even from here and this far away, and the weather like it is, I can still see the outlines of Mount Fuji." And then I said, "Look, a commitment like that's not in my gift. I'll take it back to Australia, and I don't have a lot of influence, but I'll see what happens." So after the meeting, I get pulled aside by the Trade Commissioner, and the guy says, "Where did you get advice on Japanese culture from?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And I won't use the language I used, but what are you talking about? And he said, "Oh, he said you amazed them." He said, you had a culturally sensitive comment, and then your response was not only totally appropriate, it illustrated a sense of confidence and power. And I said to him, I won't use the language. No idea what I was going to say. What else could I have said? And anyway, that was nice to have. And the other thing that happened, which I upset one of the other delegations, and I was the last speaker before lunch, and I had a simultaneous translator, and the guy before me was mad at me. Robert Yao from Singapore was angry with the Australian delegation. So he spread his contribution out to try and create a problem, which he was.
Yeah.
We didn't want to keep the Japanese from lunch, and there's about 700 of them.
Right.
And there was about 700 of them. So while he was talking, I said to the translator, I said, look, this doesn't need to be translated for the Australians, because it's, they we'll copy this off and give them copies of it. I said, what we'll do is I'll read the first paragraph and you'll translate it in full. And then from then on, I'll only read the first sentence of the first paragraph in English and you'll translate the full paragraph.
Right.
So we went through it and we put some marks in where, and I did that, and then I started on the first paragraph and I stopped at the first sentence, and the Trade Commissioner put his head in his hands. And then my translator went on, and then we did this again, we did it again, and suddenly the Trade Commissioner put his thumbs up.
Right.
And we got the Japanese to lunch more or less on time.
Ah, good. Yeah.
Because the Australian speakers didn't need to hear the speech.
Yeah.
It was the Japanese who needed to hear it.
Yeah.
So, I could go on for a long time.
Yeah. It's all right, we can go on for another 20 minutes, half an hour. So.
Anyway, eventually we set up a Software Industry Association under the ACS auspices.
Yeah.
That was set up in all states. We applied the domino principle, and that was we knocked off all the small states first.
Right.
And then the biggest states in ACS said we want to be in.
Right.
And that was a fantastic experience. There was a window where, which is not so nice, but there was a window where Ian Dennis and myself, and I think largely both of us, but individually, had access to the John Button, the Trade Minister, who was the third ranking cabinet member at the time.
That's right, yeah.
And we were pushing what was happening in other countries, and in particular in Sweden. And I come from a left-wing background, very left-wing background,
right.
very, very left-wing.
Yeah.
And I was, I know that the people I worked with knew that, but I went to a lot of trouble to try not to do things or say things or put things in a way that would frighten my businessman supporters.
Yeah.
And there was a very famous trade unionist called Laurie Carmichael who had access to Button and who was pushing industry development and stuff like that. And I wouldn't say I knew Laurie well, but we were known to each other.
Yeah.
And I went to a lot of trouble to avoid him. I went to a lot of trouble. I didn't want my carefully, how would you groomed supporters to be frightened talking to somebody like Carmichael, who was a well-known communist.
Yeah.
In retrospect, that would have to have been the most stupid thing I've ever done.
Oh, right.
Most stupid thing, because Carmichael, as I subsequently discovered, had far more influence than anybody thought he did.
Right.
In Button's department.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that if we had been on the same page and working together, it would have been much harder for John Button to
dismiss things.
Yeah. Well, not putting, not do things.
Yeah, sure.
Not do things. Much harder, because Button, there were all sorts of reasons why they were keeping Carmichael on site. Basically what I'm saying is that because I'm despite what people think, I'm actually a timid person who tries to avoid unnecessary controversy. Yeah. I know people don't think that. In this particular case, the cost of not being a bit braver.
Yeah.
At least of having gone and seen Carmichael and talked to him and seeing where he was going, was not just expensive for me, but who knows, it might have been one of the things that might have changed the Australian economy.
Sure.
So I had nightmares for years about the fact that we had Button's ear and other senior ministers' ear, and we could not get them to change the Australian economy.
Yeah.
We were not asking for anything other than industry development. We didn't succeed, and I had nightmares about this because I thought, what did I get wrong? I've learnt what I've got wrong is I wasn't ruthless enough.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite ruthless enough.
So with that, how I see you coming for this, Karl, is that if you teamed up with people like Larry Carmichael, it was the Federated Ironworkers, wasn't it?
Well, he was the AEU.
Right.
The AEU and the ACTU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But having that more comprehensive picture of, because John Button was looking at the car industry and that at that time, that having the software industry on a similar sort of footing, if you like.
Well, I've subsequently learned there's a guy, a deacon in the Australia Institute, has written a book on, a couple of books on Scandinavian experience, and he talked at some length about Carmichael's work, and I don't even know if I actually bothered to read Carmichael's reports. And the thing about it, I think the message is that you've got to listen to the message. You've got to listen to the message, and you've got to, and we're not good at it. Humans are not good at it, and we have all sorts of reasons why we might not want to listen to a message, or we don't listen to a message. And in my case, I was worried about my reputation, and I look at that and say people need to be prepared to be bolder.
Right.
I think I was bold about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But people need to be bolder, and they also need to be not worried about too much about spooking the horses.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean you deliberately frighten horses.
Yeah.
But the people who I find I'm learning from who are very good at that, someone like Rod Dilnut, people like Rod Dilnut and Roger Clark,
Yeah.
I regard as they're people who are better at that confrontational initiative stuff than I am. What sort of happened was that I was the director of the computers systems and software engineering board at ACS National from 1993.
Yeah.
Actually, I was the director that had all of the whole lot of it, and I was being so successful that they decided they needed to split the boards because I had a bit worried about what my next steps might be.
Right.
So they split the boards into three. And that was very, very, very successful.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why it was successful was I took the view that as the board director, my job was to make it easy for people who were going to chair committees to make sure they had as little of the interior stuff as possible. And as a member of ACS Council and having a bit of a track record, it wasn't difficult to get problems solved.
Yeah.
One of the outcomes that we got from this was the Australian Safety Critical Systems Association.
Yep. Which is still running today.
Still running today.
Yep.
Now, the way that came up was they complained about the amount. They were a committee, one of my committees, and they were running fantastic conferences, and they were making money, and they were complaining about the share that ACS was taking, and I managed to convince Glenn, the treasurer, that they should be allowed to accumulate all their surpluses. I think there was some sort of fee. We had a fee.
Yeah.
We weren't going to lose money on it, but they could accumulate their surpluses. Now, as it turned out, if you wanted to do something like that today, it would be impossible.
Well, yes. Yeah.
But in this case, it took a couple of phone calls.
Yeah.
And presumably Glenn probably got somebody else to, agree.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the flexibility that the society had,
Mm.
and then that they wanted to break away from the society. So I suggested that they used the model we used for the Software Industry Association, that as a national SIG.
Yeah.
So they have a separate constitution, but they're operating under ACS requirements.
Right.
One of the elements of the constitution, I haven't looked for a while, but I'm pretty sure it will be, that their books have to be auditable.
Mm.
So what that means is they don't audit their own books.
Yeah.
They may do, but the principle was you don't audit. If you're a big SIG and you've got members and you've got funds, you don't audit it. You keep them in an auditable manner, which means that ACS auditors can just fold them in to their audit.
Yeah.
And then what happened was that I dropped off the board. I'd been there too long, according to some people, and which is probably right too. They changed the constitution, so I left senior leadership positions in 2006, and then I was on the Victorian branch committee off and on over a long period.
Sure.
But anyway, what happened was that the hoo-ha with the move in 2019 to a company limited by guarantee, and I didn't particularly want to become involved in that, but I started looking at some of the clauses in it, and I sort of said to myself, this is not what we should be.
Yeah.
And I teamed up with Roger Clark and a few other people, and we fought that. And then eventually the general meeting that approved it was overturned by a court decision on essentially, if you like, on sloppiness. And not only that, there was things happening in the society that were not didn't pass a pub test.
Sure.
I think that's the way to put it diplomatically.
Probably a fair call.
Ashley Goldsworthy wrote a letter in 2019 or 2020 which has never been answered in full, which I think is pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And so I got involved in that. I contributed a small amount of funds to Roger so they could mount the case, and I provided some, I don't know how useful it was, but tactical advice here and there.
Right.
I participated vigorously in the consultative process for the Constitution, which up until a certain point where I thought either they were doing more or less, being a bit arrogant, doing what I thought they needed to do, or they weren't going to listen to any more.
Yeah.
So I just dropped off that. But I wanted to make a point about that, and it's an unashamedly political point, is that as a white person, my experience of consultative process is generally poor. Management comes and says, we've decided to do this, here is what we're going to do, what do you think about it? Management never comes to us and says, we're here now, this is where we think we're at, this is where we want to be in 5 years.
Right.
How do we get there? Now, my university doesn't do it, so I think that one of the things at the back of people's mind in the Yes campaign is who are I won't use the vernacular, but who are these people who think that consultative processes are going to deliver anything?
Right.
Not part of our culture.
Yeah.
Whereas it is part of their culture. That's an important part of their culture. So what I'm saying is that consultative processes and seeing that consultative processes deliver is enormously powerful.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that's going on at the moment is related to the fact that, being diplomatic, it's related to the fact that people don't want to listen to the outcome of a very thorough consultative process.
Sure. Yeah.
The best way of putting it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and I appreciate you putting some context into what happened in 2019 and 20.
And then there are idiotic things that that the rules are 8.4, which essentially mean that if I want to nominate for a vice president's position, then all the boards that are under that vice president have got to endorse me.
Right.
Now they use the word endorse, endorse me. Otherwise, I won't be put on the ballot paper unless management committee decides otherwise.
Right.
Now, Ashley Goldsworthy put himself for vice president in 2020.
Right. Yeah.
And he didn't get past the board approval stage.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, it's seriously laughable.
Yeah. Well, you've got a former 2 times president, former CEO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, you don't think he's good enough to?
No,
now,
I'm not saying that.
No. I'm saying to the society. Now it's
Yeah.
now one has to make a very fine point here.
Yeah.
And make it very clear. Nobody is saying that Congress had to elect Ashley. That's not what's being said. What's being said is that the idea that not only he but other people are stricken off because of this, because of the power of the boards, is a serious issue.
Sure.
Now, what one needs to make sure is that the process that the boards are using to make that decision makes sense.
Yeah.
The boards might even, and I'd never thought about this until this stuff came up in November, maybe the boards didn't even know exactly what it was they were being asked to do.
Yeah.
They see the word endorse. Endorse for most of us means I endorse you, Paul, as the Labor Party candidate for wherever, and that means that I want you to be elected and I want you to be, and I'm going to put all my resources into getting you there. But that's not what they're being asked. What they're really being asked is, Paul, a potentially suitable candidate.
Yeah, that's right. So give them the tick of approval.
Yeah. Now that's the first thing. The second thing is that there needed to be a process. One of the things I've driven people nuts here is I've insisted on processes. Gradually, I didn't do it initially, but I've gradually insisted on processes. So we do things according to the rules, but we go a step beyond. So we, for example, in the selection of a new branch Congress rep, there was a call for nominations, could be self, but they had to be seconded. I said they must be seconded. I was told by a couple of people I'm overdoing it, and I said no. I want to be in a space where, when this is finished, that it can't be questioned. And conforming to the rules, doing it by the rules, well, that can't be questioned either, except it doesn't pass the pub test.
Right. Yeah.
It's not, the branch committee shall appoint a representative.
Yeah. So moving into our last 10 minutes, so where do you see the future for ACS, particularly in light of the changes that you've been trying to get through?
What I think is important is for management committee, I don't know, I'm not privy to what criticisms have been made of the final document, so but I tend to think that they're not going to be the kind of thing that means the document should be chucked out and they should start again. I think what's got to happen is that the society's got to accept would be well advised, let me put it like that, extremely well advised, to accept that draft and maybe workshop it some more if there are wrinkles in it. I mean, one of my wrinkles, which I'm seriously concerned about, is that Congress can't direct the management committee.
Right.
Now, I don't want to go through all the arguments about that, but that is a fundamental. That is proving to be a problem.
Yeah.
And the second thing about it is that it would not be inappropriate for management committee to be a delegated committee of Congress.
Right.
Now, in my union, the national executive is bound by National Council.
Right.
Now, the wording gives them some wriggle room.
Yep. Sure.
You know, I mean, it's not cast
Yep.
iron, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And as Ashley's, you know, in discussions pointed out, management committee could be a delegated committee of Congress with
Right.
appropriate delegations, which
Yep.
would include carrying out the business of Congress as decided by Congress between meetings.
Yeah.
But no, neither of those two things are in the draft.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that the other thing too that's important for the society is to understand resilience theory. Organisation resilience theory has an outcome that says that unless you're in a very narrow ecosystem, but if you're an ecosystem that's got dynamism and is changing and things are likely to happen that you feel you can't predict, you're much better off with subsystems that have autonomy
Yeah.
than you are with subsystems that are trying to follow fixed direction
Sure.
which isn't working.
Yeah.
And there are organisations that don't understand that very well. Universities are one of them.
Yeah. Right.
But ACS, so for example, what's been achieved in the last 3 or 4 years here in this branch has been achieved because the branch has assumed that it had the autonomy
Right. Yeah.
and fought for it.
And yeah, gone out and done things.
Got out and done things, and I think it's fair to say that in some cases, up until not so long ago, we still felt that there was obstructions. The other people who get things done and have a historical track record going back to the 70s are the Queenslanders.
Right. Yeah.
Queensland branch of the society's the only one that I know of that's got chapters.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Now there's another story, but so this question of autonomy is, I go back to where I started, as Ashley basically said, here's what you want you to do. If you stuff up, I'll sack you.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, one of different times, nobody's actually asked me why did I put my hand up again, but I anticipated the question, and the answer is that I was able to do what I did in the ACS because of the structure of the ACS.
Yeah.
I was left alone. I was given a delegation. I was trusted, and I was able to get on with it.
Yeah.
We have been replicating that in the Victorian branch. Whenever the young people come up with something, generally speaking, we back it.
Right.
Now, there's been some cases we've had to very quietly and very gently turn the wick down.
Yeah. Sure.
And I've been impressed with the tact
Yeah.
and the skill that's been done with. So what
Right.
we want, we've got, nationally, we have fewer professional members than we had in 2006.
Yep.
Now, we have to address that, but I won't talk about that because you're obviously running out of time.
Yeah. No, we can revisit it at a future date. But
Yeah, but I mean, and what I say about that is that we have to get to a stage where employers say, member of ACS or its equivalent is required for this job.
Yeah.
The start is to say members of ACS or its equivalent will be, how would you put it, will be given preference.
Yeah.
Now, whenever I get an opportunity to push that line with someone who's in that space, and there's a tactic for doing it, which it seems to me amazing that we don't use. I mean, I won't go into it because I don't want people to know.
Sure.
When you turn that off, I'll tell you what it is.
Okay.
But the thing is that there is a simple thing that ACS should be doing that would mean that it's positioned. The reason why that is important, PricewaterhouseCoopers stuff could be traced back to professionalism, the lack of professionalism, and robo-debt.
Yep, sure. And that is a very big question for the Australian, I think, the global IT community. Yeah.
Yep.
On that note, I think we can wind up here, Karl, but I'm sure we'll continue that discussion.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. It's been great.